Eckert nodded. I'll go along with that, and I think it's time we did something about it. Tonight we'll have to start eliminating certain ideas. He took a small case from their pile of luggage and opened it. Inside was a small battery-powered box with various dials set on the front, and the usual electrodes and nerve probes protruding from the sides and top. Templin looked at it with surprise. That will be dangerous to use, won't it? It might be more dangerous not to. Time is getting to be a factor, and we have to make some progress. We have a safety margin of a sort, and that we can erase memories of its use, but the procedure is still risky. Who do we use it on? As long as we're going to use it, Eckert said grimly. We might as well start at the top. When they had started out, the investigation had seemed fairly simple to Eckert. There were two possibilities. Either Pendleton had committed suicide, or he had been murdered. Knowing Pendleton's record, the first possibility had seemed remote. A few weeks on Tunpesh had convinced him that the second possibility was also remote. One or the other had to be eliminated. The second would be the easiest. There were other reasons as well. Templin was still convinced that Pendleton had been killed, and Templin was an emotional man with access to powerful weapons. The question was not what he might eventually do, but when. The night looked as if it would be another rainy one. It was cooler than usual, and dark clouds were scudding across the starlit sky. Eckert and Templin stood in the shadows of the house, watching the dark lane for any casual strollers. Eckert looked at his watch. A few minutes more and Nyova would come out for his evening walk. Eckert had just started to think longingly of his bed and the warmth inside his house when the door opened, and Nyova appeared in the opening. Eckert held his breath while the chieftain stood uncertainly in the doorway, testing the night air, and then let it out slowly when Nyova started down the lane. They closed in on him. "The Minshars from Earth," he said without alarm. "Is there something you wish?" "We would like you to come with us to our house for a while," Eckert started in. Nyova looked puzzled. "I do not understand. Would not tomorrow do as well?" "I'm afraid it'll have to be tonight." Nyova was obviously not quite sure of their threat. "No, Eckert caught him before he touched the ground. Templin took the rag off the butt of the needle gun, lifted the ruler's feet, and they disappeared into the brush along the lane. They would have to sneak back to the house, Eckert knew, and hope that nobody saw them lugging the unconscious native. He laughed a little grimly to himself. Templin had expected cloak and dagger. It looked as if he was going to get more than his share of it after all. Once inside the house, Eckert arranged the electrodes and the small nerve probes on Nyova, who had come too. "I am sorry," Eckert said formally, "but we find this necessary. You understand that we have to find out all we can about Pendleton. We have no choice." He found it difficult to look the ruler in the face, even with the realization that this was strictly in the line of duty, and that the chieftain would not be hurt. "But I have cooperated with you in every way possible," Nyova protested. "I have told you everything we know." "That's right," Templin said bluntly. "And now we're going to ask you the same questions." Nyova looked blank for a moment and then reddened as he understood. Templin turned to the dials on the little square box. "We would like to know," Eckert said politely, "where you were 2 weeks ago at this time of night." Nyova looked surprised. "You know that I was at the Halera, the coming-of-age ceremony. You were there with me as my guests. You should assuredly know I was there." Eckert looked over at Templin, who nodded shortly. It had been a standard question to test the apparatus. "Did Pendleton have any enemies here on Tunpesh?" Nyova emphatically shook his head. "To the best of my knowledge, Minshar, Pendleton had no enemies here. He would have none." Templin's face showed its disappointment. "Who were his friends?" "He had no friends." Templin glowered angrily, but he said nothing. Eckert frowned. The same answer. Pendleton had had no enemies, and yet he had had no friends. "Would you say he was well liked here?" "I would say no." "Why not?" A shrug. "It is hard to explain, and you would not be able to understand." "Did somebody here kill Pendleton?" Eckert could hear Templin suck in his breath. "No." "Ask him that again," Templin cut in. "Did somebody kill Pendleton?" "No." "Did Pendleton kill himself?" A trace of disgust showed on Nayova's face. "Yes." "Why?" "I do not know." Templin gestured to Eckert to take the box. "Let me ask him." He came around and faced the native. "Why did your people kill Pendleton?" "We did not kill him. We had no reason to wish him harm." "Do you expect us to believe that Pendleton killed himself? We knew him better than that." "You may believe whatever you wish, but men change, and perhaps he did. We did not kill him. Such an act would have been repugnant to us." "I think that's enough," Eckert said calmly. Templin bit his lip as Eckert touched another dial on the machine. Nyova suddenly jerked, looked blank, and slumped in the chair. Eckert took off the electrodes. "Help me take him back, will you, Ray?" They carried Nyova to his house, stayed with him until he showed signs of recovering, and then left. "Why didn't you use a drug?" Templin demanded. "Possible allergy or serum reaction. We don't know enough about these people to take chances. They're humanoid, not human." "They can fool machines, though, can't they?" Eckert didn't reply. "All right, I know they can't," Templin said grudgingly. "He was telling the truth all the time, wasn't he?" Eckert nodded. "I never did think he was lying. They don't seem to be the type. Their culture doesn't allow for it." They were silent for a while, walking quietly in the lanes between the shuttered, seemingly untenanted houses. "I'm glad," Templin said quietly. "It's off my mind. It's hard to believe that anybody here would deliberately kill somebody else." Templin's reactions would be worth something now for Eckert to study. They wouldn't be inhibited by his conviction that the natives had murdered his best friend. Just what reactions and emotions he would display, Eckert wasn't sure, nor how Templin's psychology, so similar to Pendleton's, would help solve the problem. They had eliminated one possibility, but that still left them with the one they had started with. Why had Pendleton taken the short way out? A breeze scampered through the open door and played tag with the papers on the desk. Eckert swore without annoyance and calmly started chasing those that had been blown on the floor. "What did Pendleton have to say in his reports?" Templeton sat in the doorway, his eyes barely open. He had begun taking siestas in the early afternoon after their usual light lunch. It was pleasant to sit on the worn wood and feel the warmth of sun and smell the crisp freshness of the outdoors, or maybe watch the kids playing in the lane, catching the butterflies that floated past in the afternoon air. About what you'd expect, mostly reports on the industry, climate, system of government, and general anthropological information that he thought might prove interesting. As far as I can see, he didn't lack enthusiasm for making the reports. If anything, he grew more enthusiastic as time went on. He practically wrote us treatises on every phase of life on Tunpesh. Templin's eyes closed all the way. Any indication in his reports that he didn't like it here? Just the other way around. Everything points to the fact that he liked the climate, the people, the way they lived. "I don't blame him," Templin murmured. "This is a lovely place to be. The climate is wonderful. The people are happy, hard-working. The society itself seems to be perfect. Sometimes you can't help but compare it too damn favorably to Earth." Eckert shoved the papers to one side and came over to where Templin sat. He felt rather lazy himself. The warmth and sunshine corroded ambition as it did in most climates like this. "You know, there isn't any crime here," Templin continued. He laughed to himself. "Except the minor crime wave we caused when we landed here 5 months ago. No criminals, no villains foreclosing mortgages, no gamblers bleeding the gullible white, and nobody trying to sell gold bricks. I can't get over it." A butterfly flapped into the sunlight that glistened on his tunic, like a drop of water on a piece of black velvet. It hung there for a moment and then was off, its wings flashing. Eckert watched it go in a sort of torpor. It was pleasant to relax and slip the leash off your thoughts quietly and see where they took you. Maybe it was a sort of letdown. They had expected 6 months of danger in a potentially criminal culture, and instead it had been paradise. As Templin said, you couldn't help but compare it to Earth. No greed, no belligerency, no contempt for the rights of others, no cynicism, no sarcasm, and no trampling crowds in the stores. The little important things. "Where did you go last night, Ray?" Templin stirred. "A community meeting, almost like a Quaker meeting. You get up and say what you think. The one last night was about some local government issues. They talked it over, decided what to do, and how much each person should contribute. The original democracy, Ted. Eckert was wide awake. I wonder why I wasn't invited. He felt slightly put out that Templin should have been asked to something like that, and he hadn't been. Well, I wasn't invited, Templin said. I invited myself. Have you noticed, Eckert mused, we haven't been invited to too many functions lately? They know we're busy, Templin said lazily. They're too polite to ask us to go someplace if they thought we were busy doing something else. You like it here, don't you, Ray? Templin brushed idly at a marauding mosquito. It took me pretty long to warm up to it, but I guess I do. They only had a month left, Eckert knew. A month to do practically nothing but lie in the sun and watch the people. Oh, they could go through the motions of investigating and look over Pendleton's old records and reports, but there was nothing in them of any value. He yawned and sat down and settled his back against the door frame. It began to look as if they'd never find out why Pendleton had done what he had. And it didn't seem to matter somehow. Eckert opened the door slowly. Templin was asleep on the bed, the sunlight lying in bands across his tanned bare back. He had on a strip of white cloth, knotted at the waist in imitation of what the natives wore. It was mussed now, and the knot had started to come loose. He looked a lot healthier than he had when they first landed. More peaceful, more content. He appeared to have gained 10 pounds and shed 5 years in the last 6 months. And now the vacation was over. It was time to go back. Ray, Eckert called out to him softly. Templin didn't stir but continued his soft and very regular breathing. Eckert found a book and dropped it on the floor with a thud. Templin woke up but didn't move. What do you want, Ted? How did you know it was me? Templin chucked as if it were hugely funny. Riddles yet. Who else would it be? No Toon Peshin would be rude enough to wake somebody up in the middle of a nap, so it had to be you. You know what you would have done if somebody had awakened you like that 5 months ago? Templin tried to nod, but was slightly handicapped by the bed underneath him. I would have pulled my rusty atom gun and plugged him. Eckert went over to where they kept their luggage and started pulling the boxes out from the wall. Well, I've got good news for you. A liner just landed to pick us up. They were going through this sector and they got an order from the service to stop by for us. Some cargo wallopers will be here in a few minutes to help us with our gear. Ted? Eckert paused. Yes? I'm not going back. Why not? Eckert's face had a look of almost clinical curiosity on it. Why should I? I like it here. I want to live here the rest of my life. The pieces began to fall in place. I'm not so sure you'd like it, Ray. Not after a while. All your friends are back on Earth. Everybody you know is back there. It's just the novelty of something new and something different here. I felt that way a lot of times in different cultures and different societies. You'd change your mind after a while. Those aren't reasons, Ted. Why should I go back to a world where most of the people are unhappy at some time, and a few people all the time? As far as I'm concerned, Tunpash is my home now, and I don't intend to leave it. Eckert was fascinated. It was like a case history unfolding right before his eyes. Are you sure you would enjoy it here for the rest of your life? Have you made any friends to take the place of those back home? It takes time to become acquainted, even more time to make friends, Templin said defensively. You can't desert the service, Eckert pointed out. You still have your duty. Templin laughed in his pillow. It won't work, Ted. Duty's just a catchword, a jingo phrase. They can get along without me, and you know it. What about Pendleton, Ray? He died here, you know, in mysterious circumstances. Would going back help him any? He wasn't murdered, we know that. And why do people commit suicide? For what one of several thousand possible reasons did Pendleton? We don't know. We'll never know. And if we did know, what good would it do? He had changed a lot in 6 months, Eckert saw. Too much. What if I told you I knew why Pendleton killed himself? Eckert asked. And that you would do the same if you stayed here. Don't use it, Ted. It's poor psychology. It won't work. The pieces made a perfect picture, but Templin was going back whether he wanted to or not. The only difficulty was that deep underneath, Eckert sympathized with him. Perhaps if he had been younger, less experienced. Then you won't go back with us? Templin closed his eyes and rolled over on his back. No. There was dead silence. Templin could smell the piney scent of the woods and feel the warmth of soft sunlight that lanced through the blinds. Some place far away there was the faint chatter of kids at play, but outside of that it was quiet. Too quiet. Templin opened his eyes in sudden alarm. "Ted, don't!" He caught the gas full in the face and tumbled back on the bed, unconscious. Eckert opened the hatch to the observation cabin as quietly as he could. Templin was seated on one of the pneumatic couches, staring soberly at a small yellow star in the black sky. He didn't look up. "It's me, Ray," Eckert said. Templin didn't move. "I suppose I owe you an apology," Eckert began. "But I had to gas you to get you to leave. Otherwise you wouldn't have left. And the same thing would have happened to you that happened to Don Pendleton." "You're sure of that?" Templin asked bitterly. "Reasonably. You're a lot like Pendleton, you know. In fact, that's why you were selected to go. Not so much because you knew him as the fact that psychologically you were a lot like him. We thought that by studying your response to situations there, we would have a picture of what Pendleton's must have been." Templin didn't want to talk about it, Eckert realized, but it had to be explained to him. "Do you want to know why Pendleton killed himself?" Templin shrugged listlessly. "I suppose we should have seen it right away," Eckert continued. "Any race that is so happy with their way of life that they show no curiosity about strangers, the way they live, or what possessions they have, must have something to be happy about. Tunpesh is something that might happen only once in 1,000 civilizations. Maybe less, Ray. The environment is perfection, and so are the people, or at least as near to perfection as it's possible to get. An intelligent people who have as much technology as they desire, living simply with themselves and each other. A fluke of nature, perhaps. No criminals, no insane, no neurotics. Perfect cultural pattern. Tunpesh is a paradise. You didn't want to leave. Neither did I, and neither did Pendleton." Templin turned on him. "So it was paradise. Would it have been criminal if I'd stayed there? Who would it have hurt?" "It would have hurt you," Eckert said gravely, "because the Tunpeshans would never have accepted you. We're too different, Ray. We're too aggressive, too pushy, too persistent. We're not perfect. You see, no matter how long we stayed there, we would never have fit in. We lived in a harsh society, and we bear the scars of it. Our own environment has conditioned us, and we can't change. Oh, we could try, but it would crop up in little ways. Because of that, the natives could never genuinely like us. We'd never belong. Their own cultural pattern wouldn't allow them to accept us. Their cultural pattern is like the fire and the sword that were placed outside the Garden of Eden, after Adam and Eve were driven out, to keep it sacrosanct. If you're an outsider, you stay outside. You can never come in." He paused a moment, waiting for Templin to say something. Templin didn't. "The natives have a word for it. Kava. It means, I suppose, different, not necessarily inferior, just different. We should have seen it as time went on. We weren't invited places. They seemed to avoid us. A natural reaction for them, I guess, I have to admit." Eckert cleared his throat huskily. "You see, what happened to Pendleton," he continued awkwardly, "is that he fell in love with paradise. But paradise would have nothing to do with him. By the time 3 years were up, he knew that he was an outcast in Eden, and he couldn't leave to come back and try to forget. He was stranded in paradise and had to look forward to spending 4 more years there as a pariah. He couldn't do it, and neither could you." He was quiet for a moment, thinking of the cool, scented air and the warm sunshine and the happy kids playing on the grassy lanes. "I suppose it didn't affect you at all, did it?" Templin asked, venomously. A shadow crossed Eckert's face. "You should know better than that, Ray. Do you think I'll ever forget it? Do you think I'll ever be satisfied with my own culture again?" "What are you going to do about it?" "It's dangerous to human beings, Ray. Looking at it brutally, their culture has killed 2 of our people, as surely as if Tunpesh were populated by murderous savages. We'll probably send a larger commission, throw it open to commerce, try to change it." Templin gripped the sides of the couch, his face strained and tense with anxiety. "What happens to it depends on the report you make, doesn't it?" "Yes, it does." Then make up something in your report. Say the climate is bad for Earthmen. Say anything, but don't let them change, Tunpesh." Eckert looked at him for a long moment, remembering. "Okay, Ray," he said slowly. "We'll leave Paradise alone. Strictly alone. It'll be put on the quarantine list." He turned and left. Behind him, Templin swiveled around in his chair and gazed bleakly at the tiny mote of yellow fading in the blackness of space. End of The Fire and the Sword by Frank M. Robinson.